Monsters held a lot of appeal for audiences from the very beginning of cinema, and it's no wonder that we're still obsessed with them today. What's at the heart of the monster film is really our unspoken anxieties, our hidden subconscious, and all of the fears that we really need to put a name to. And monsters are really there to put a face to what is unspeakable.
Audrey 2 is the talking carnivorous plant from the Little Shop of Horrors musical, originally based on Audrey Jr. from the Roger Corman film Little Shop of Horrors. Audrey 2 is a very unique creature. It talks, it sings, it's a wonderful puppet. When I was a kid, I actually was not quite old enough to see this movie, but my parents sat me down and made me watch the VHS just to kind of marvel at this giant talking plant.
Audrey started out cute, and I think that's kind of what makes him so terrifying.
I think it's some kind of fly trap, but I haven't been able to identify it in any of my books. I gave it my own name, though. I call it an Audrey 2.
After me.
I hope you don't mind.
It seems like a lot of fun at the very beginning, and it seems like it's going to give us the fame and fortune and the girl and everything we want. And it turns out to be, of course, a monkey's paw, where it is going to devour us and everything we love.
The puppet that was built for 1986's Little Shop of Horrors was the largest puppet created for film up to that time. It actually required over 60 puppeteers to help control it. Audrey 2 was designed by Lyle Conway. Conway had worked before with Frank Oz on The Muppet Show and other Jim Henson films, which actually makes Audrey 2 probably the scariest Muppet of all time.
They frame Little Shop of Horrors as a period piece with a kind of doo-wop, late 50s, early 60s soundtrack. And the monster, the Venus flytrap Audrey 2, once it grows big enough to open its mouth and talk, sings pure Motown in the voice of Levi Stubbs from the Four Tops, which is, you know, from a musical point of view, very wonderful, and from a conceptual point of view, very funny.
Tui, you talked. You open your trap, you sing, and you say...
Feed me, Carbon! Feed me now!
I can't.
I'm starving!
I think one of my favorite scenes of Little Shop of Horrors is sort of the first time that Seymour realizes what Audrey 2 is capable of. He accidentally sort of pricks his finger, and Audrey 2 feeds on the leftovers. It's just so fun, so full of life, and so hungry for blood. I mean, what more could you want in a monster?
Maybe not every fan of 1975's Jaws knows that the shark actually has a first name, and it's Bruce. Steven Spielberg named the 3 mechanical sharks that he used to film Jaws after his entertainment lawyer at the time, Bruce Raymer.
Jaws is perfect to make a terrifying monster as scarifying as possible. Because in Jaws, you never really see it. When it shows up, it's just to kill. It is pure nightmare fuel.
Shark didn't work, they didn't show the shark. They had to retool the first hour of the film. He's a shadow, he's the point of view of the camera, he's John Williams' score. We feel it rather than experience it as a protagonist, as an antagonist, and it's all about the characters. But when you do see the shark, it's ingenious.
I think everybody remembers the first time they watched Jaws. I mean, I remember seeing it when I was like maybe 7 years old and being terrified to go to any body of water. I'm not just talking about beaches, I'm talking about going to a pool. I was like, Bruce is gonna find his way into the pool somehow. He's so smart.
The shark looks pretty darn good when you do see it in that amazing sequence where Brody's chumming the water, and it's terrifying.
Slow ahead. I can go slow ahead. Come on down and chum some of this shit.
If you watch it frame by frame, you realize there's very little articulation to Bruce. He just kind of like bobs up and goes down. It's such a great jump scare, one of the all-time great jump scares in a horror film.
This is a movie that is ruthless enough to kill a naked chick and a little boy and a dog in the first 20 minutes. One of the most brilliantly directed movies of all time. It is well directed enough so that when Bruce does finally show up, we still kind of buy him, even if in a vacuum we probably would not.
Cenobites are pretty unique in the history of movie monsters because they are neither good nor evil. They call them explorers in the furthest regions of experience.
Cenobites come to us from the Hellraiser franchise, which are based on Clive Barker's books of blood. They are tortured, they've got blood dripping from them, they've got torture instruments hanging off of them, all of the leather, all of the gloves.
It's not just the incredible design and creation of them as monsters. I think it's the world that Clive Barker was able to create. It's the whole package.
And it's a religion called the Order of the Gash. So just the thought that there's these extra-dimensional beings who are initiating people into this physical sensation that borders the line between torture and ecstasy for some people.
The leader is Pinhead, who was never actually called Pinhead in the script. That was kind of a nickname coined by the film's crew that fans just kind of embraced, and it kind of took off from there. I think he was initially referred to in the script as the priest, or my personal favorite, Hell's Pope.
What Doug Bradley brings to Pinhead the Cenobite is a kind of intense regality. He's very fearsome, not because he's jumping out at you and being scary, but because he's so staid, because he is so calm, because he just explains these horrible concepts so normally, and that's what makes him creepy.
You solved the box. We came. Now you must come with us. Taste our pleasures.
One of my favorite Cenobites is from Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth. He's the CD Cenobite, and he shoots CDs at you, so at least you can find a use for your old CDs instead of just putting them out on your balcony to scare pigeons. They seem like a modern-day djinn or genie, where you, instead of rubbing a lamp, you turn that box, and out they come, and you gets what you get.
When I was young, we binged Hellraiser 1 through 3, and it was very easy to handle. It's a lot of fun, but after you watch 3 in a row, just all that building on top of each other gets you a good nightmare when you're going to bed.
I think for me, one of the scariest monsters of my childhood was Darkness from Legend, as embodied by the great Tim Curry. This is one of the most makeup-heavy monsters out there. It took over 5 hours to apply the prosthetics and the makeup to Tim Curry's face and body. And that performance, which a lot of it is on stilts, is so physically unimaginable.
His character, his voice, his personality really makes Darkness pop. Even when you have him described as the most generic thing, Darkness, yes, it's scary, but what does it mean? Well, in Legend, it means Tim Curry, right there on screen as a creature that everybody that sees it just won't forget.
I love this idea of a creature that looks the way he does, but still seduces. The whole movie itself really is about this loss of innocence and, at the end of the day, sex. So why wouldn't you have a character that is able to seduce regardless of how they look?
I have but to ask.
I will stay here with you as you wish. But on one condition.
Anything.
I want to kill the unicorn.
What Tim Curry does is have a blast. It's great fun to be evil. And Darkness has always been Darkness. There is no beginning, there is no ending. He's just there, being evil, tempting other people. And he really likes his job.
It's one of those villains where you're like, oh, this is the bad guy, but you really want to watch him more than you want to watch anything else on screen. And I think the film knows that, and so it kind of teases that reveal, and it teases his presence, and that's what you end up looking forward to the most.
Part of why Men in Black's Edgar the Bug is such a memorable creature is because it's the perfect marriage of makeup effects, special effects, and a wonderful performance by Vincent D'Onofrio. Edgar is a bug wearing a man's skin, and one of the great things about the makeup effects is you see that skin pulled around and rotting throughout the film. You see parts of the bug start to emerge. You see him kind of shift the skin around. It's a really wonderful and weird effect.
I believe he had an animal with him. It was a gift I gave him. A pet cat. It means worlds to me. I'd like to have it back.
For me, Edgar the Bug is Vincent D'Onofrio's homage to Lon Chaney, the man of 1,000 faces. Lon Chaney's Phantom of the Opera was the original Universal monster, dating back to 1925. And the way D'Onofrio, with the help of Rick Baker on makeup and special effects, kind of taped back his forehead and stretched his skin, to me, this is really a performance that is all about Phantom of the Opera. D'Onofrio was obsessed with Lon Chaney films. He watched them over and over again in preparation for filming Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. And I think here in 1997, we really see D'Onofrio giving his best Lon Chaney performance.
All I'll say is D'Onofrio should have gotten nominated for an Oscar. I think he's amazing in that movie. I think trying to play an alien that's inside a human body as that body decays, it's a brilliant take.
It's interesting to see someone like Will Smith play against that, right? If you watch that movie, Will Smith does the thing that I would do, which is to let me start crushing bugs. Ooh, was that your auntie? I think that's what he says at one point when he crushes a cockroach, trying to get a reaction out of Edgar the Bug.
It's just so viscous. It's just a reminder, too, that when you create a creature, even if it's supposed to look human, you just gotta spray it down with goop, and it's immediately gonna look better than anything else you've got. Really, really amazing performance and one of my favorite, I think, underrated aliens of 90s horror fare.
Something that makes The Fly a unique monster is it's a distinctly Canadian monster. Even the original Fly is set in Montreal. So something about this has just made filmmakers want The Fly to be Canadian.
In the early version of the film, the Fly was an interesting kind of monster because there wasn't really more to the Fly except his head. It was a human body with a large insect's head, which would be sort of strikingly different from the subsequent version of The Fly, which was directed by David Cronenberg in 1986.
In Cronenberg's The Fly, the effects are done by Chris Walas, and of course, it's outstanding. You see these crazy makeup effects, these crazy puppets. Everything is so gross. David Cronenberg himself considered the original cut of The Fly too violent and too gross. He claims that a woman threw up in an early screening, and he knew he had gone too far.
Jeff Goldblum's Brundlefly is a monster of sheer human agony. As all of its body parts start falling off, you really feel it inside. I always think about the scene when he goes through his medicine cabinet where he's been collecting toes that have fallen off and fingernails and different appendages, and he calls it the Brundle Museum of Natural History.
My teeth have begun to fall out. The medicine cabinet's now the Brundle Museum of Natural History. You want to see what else is in it?
For me, The Fly is one of my favorite and one of the most heartbreaking love stories of all time. You have Gina Davis's character, Ronnie, who is deeply, deeply in love with this man who is a little bit self-destructive, who is someone going through a grotesque change. And in spite of all that, she can't let him go.
It's an amazing monster, particularly when at the end, it's like the movie is just kind of tipping its hat and saying, well, you want a monster, here's a monster. Here's a 6-foot-tall, fully ambulatory animatronic creature, and yet it still has these eyes that are like the window to its soul, and you still feel something, particularly when it asks to be put out of its misery.
It's not just a monster movie. You're not desperate to destroy this creature, and like you're not gonna call in the Marines and get the army. It's a private affair. It's a private, heartbreaking affair. And I actually think it's one of the most romantic horror movies in the genre.
The Gill Man from Creature from the Black Lagoon is one of my favorite monsters of all time, and he's one of my favorite Universal monsters of all time. And the reason is he's kind of sexy. And I know I'm not the only one that feels that way.
Gillman was designed by Millicent Patrick. And when you look at Gillman, you really see Millicent Patrick's creativity and her bravado creations.
I think a lot of people may not have seen The Creature from the Black Lagoon, but this is a suit that not only works underwater, which was a huge feat at the time, it also looks like it's breathing. It looks very amphibious and very alive. This is not just a goofy man in a rubber suit. Millicent Patrick really devised a living, breathing thing.
Despite Millicent Patrick designing Gillman, she didn't receive credit. It wasn't until recently that it was truly proven that Millicent Patrick did design this very iconic monster.
One of the people absolutely enthralled by the Gill Man is director Guillermo del Toro. He said as a youth, he actually thought the film would end up with her falling in love with the creature. So when he made The Shape of Water, he retold the tale with the Gill Man really getting the girl.
It's a movie that I think a lot of people think is maybe cheesy or maybe even just freaky because literally this woman does have sex with this Gill Man, but I see why she would. He moves in a sensual way. He doesn't talk, so you don't have to worry about that. And also, he just has a sort of charm to him and a gracefulness that I think that I understand.
In The Shape of Water, it's interesting because you also have this whole Cold War undertone going on, so there's paranoia everywhere.
The natives in the Amazon worshipped it like a god.
Doesn't look like much of a god now, does it?
Well, they were primitive, sir. You know, they would toss offerings into the water, flowers, fruits, crap like that. Then they tried to stop the oil drill with bows and arrows. That didn't turn out too well.
Nature evolves, nature will have different types of creature, but it's only when mankind enters into those environments that the creature is forced to become violent. It's one of those things where the real monster is mankind.
And really interesting character is Hess Green from the film Ganja and Hess by Bill Gunn. This was a Black art house film, and executives didn't really know what to do with it because they were expecting a blaxploitation film, and they got Ganja and Hess instead.
Ganja and Hess is a vampire film like no other. It's quite gory, it has the same sort of vampire tropes you would expect, but it really gives the lead character of Dr. Hess Green a backstory. Hess Green is an anthropologist who is researching ancient African tribes who were drinking blood.
Ganja and Hess takes the vampire mythology and the vampire mythos and does something really interesting with it. It combines it with a look at colonialism and the art world, archaeology and artifacts, and really what happens when we take something out of its own cultural context and think that we have mastery over it, and what happens when we try to use it for our own ends.
Hess is also a wonderful chance for another horror icon to get a great role under his belt, and that's Duane Jones, who most people know from Night of the Living Dead. He plays Hess as closer to actually who he is. In Night of the Living Dead, he's a fairly regular man, but Hess is this erudite bohemian man. He's the only black man on his block, as he says.
Mr. Maiden, there's no possible way for you to know this, but I'm the only colored on the block. You see, and if another black man washes ashore around here, you can believe the authorities will drag me out for questioning.
And if you know anything about Duane Jones, he was famously this very classy stage actor, a very interesting guy, spoke a lot of languages, and it's wonderful to see him embodied in Hess and find a way to pick apart that version of himself.
All monster movies owe Sigmund Freud some debt, but none more so than Forbidden Planet and its monster from the id. The monster from the id in Forbidden Planet really is Freud personified.
The id is that part of us deep inside that is all about our animalistic urges. It is the lizard brain. It is what we would do if there were no rules in society. It's these hidden desires that form the id.
The monster from the id in Forbidden Planet is really scary because for a lot of the film, you don't see it. It's this invisible force.
I think one of the best sequences in Forbidden Planet is when the id is just creeping around the spaceship and it's invisible, so you just see the depressions in the ground, or when it steps onto the metal, you can just see it depressing the metal. It's such an amazingly subtle and simple special effect, and a classic case of not showing, just subtly implying the presence of the monster.
The only time we actually see visualizations of the id is when it's hit by a force field, and those animations are really lovely. If you look really closely at one of the monsters, it has a little goatee. And while that might seem strange, it's obviously a nod to the actor Walter Pidgeon. We're actually seeing a monster that looks like the lead character, which really indicates that this is born from his subconscious.
I'm not a monster, you. We're all part monsters in our subconscious. So we have laws and religion. Let me go.
It's just all coming from Morbius's mind, and he's doing this to the astronauts, and he's doing it largely because he doesn't want any of these astronauts to fool around with his daughter. I think it's The Ultimate Man is the real monster movie.
Jabba the Hutt is gross. He's a big slug man with giant eyes. There's something just slimy and gross about him. And the fact that he just sits there doing nothing is something that just captures the imagination. Now, did I ever own any Jabba the Hutt action figures? No, get those out of there. But there was a kind of attraction to him as the king of the underworld in Star Wars.
When George Lucas was writing the character of Jabba the Hutt, he really pictured this actor from the classical era, Sidney Greenstreet. Sidney Greenstreet was a British-American actor most noted for appearing in The Maltese Falcon and Casablanca. They actually really look alike when they're placed side by side. And in fact, for Jabba the Hutt, Lucas was going to have him in a little fez hat, which would have been an homage to Sidney Greenstreet's character in Casablanca.
Oh. No, I don't know. Gawawuke. I think it's an exceptional childhood memory. It's an exceptional memory because it's real. It's animatronic. It's not CG. And when it is, it's disappointing when you watch that Lucas update that happened later. But the actual Jabba the Hutt is a memorable experience. That tongue, when he licks Princess Leia, so gross. It's one of the great monsters. He's a gangster.
When it came time for George Lucas to kill off Jabba the Hutt, when Leia actually strangles him, Lucas looked to The Godfather, Francis Ford Coppola's film, and the strangulation of the character Luca Brasi. They're actually very similar scenes.
It's always great to watch a villain that is, can kind of go toe-to-toe with the heroes. Jabba's not intimidated by anyone. He's not intimidated by Luke Skywalker, certainly not intimidated by Han Solo. One of the great all-time movie gangsters.
I've always found it interesting that a lot of people think of King Kong as kind of the antagonist of the films, when in reality, it wasn't his fault at all. It was ours, us as humans. We brought him out of his natural habitat, and we brought him to New York City, which, how did nobody realize that was a terrible idea? If Kong is guilty of anything, it being a hopeless romantic.
Kong is really the king of monster movies. He is the one that set the mold for all others to follow. And when King Kong was released in 1933, it really was a milestone. No monster film had made more money than King Kong and wouldn't for a very long time after that.
Merian C. Cooper, who conceived King Kong, was a very unique kind of filmmaker who really only existed at the dawn of cinema. He was a soldier and adventurer. He made aviation films, and he made things called natural dramas. Something you need to remember about the early 20th century is the average person, especially in North America, had not seen a gorilla. When Merian C. Cooper originally wrote his King Kong draft, King Kong was 12 feet tall, not because he was trying to make a giant ape movie, but because Merian C. Cooper was just like, I don't know, how tall is a gorilla? 12 feet? So the idea of King Kong getting bigger and bigger was kind of a byproduct of gorilla fever that was gripping North America.
Kong could have only been made in the sound era because the noises that King Kong makes are so important. The sound designers actually used the real roars of tigers and lions and pumas and combined them all for Kong's very distinctive roar.
There's something sort of fascinating about watching this handmade technology and knowing that the original Kong was only 18 inches tall and that that's what they were working with through most of the movie. King Kong has been remade a couple of times subsequently. Once in 1976 with Jeff Bridges and Jessica Lange, and then later on in 2005, Peter Jackson adapted the King Kong story.
Peter Jackson's King Kong is a Kong like we had never seen before. This is a much more emotive monster. We're seeing facial gestures and body language in this monster. I think there is sympathy for Kong as a monster in the 33 version, but there's a lot more sympathy and maybe even empathy in the 2005 version. And that's because the digital technology really allows us to fall in love with Kong as a monster.
From a certain angle and in a certain light, the lady in the radiator in Eraserhead looks like Marilyn Monroe. And then from another angle and in another light, she absolutely does not. And that's sort of what's so interesting about the way David Lynch uses this figure in Eraserhead. A lady in the radiator is not a euphemism or a metaphor. She is literally a lady who lives in the radiator. She emerges to perform sort of song and dance numbers that sort of transform Eraserhead briefly into a musical.
It's interesting because I look at her and see this very scary little lady who lives in a radiator with Swiss cheese puffy cheeks, and I don't know what to make of her. Eraserhead actually has a lot of grotesque beings in it, but it's not necessarily a traditional monster movie. What could push it over the edge and make it a monster movie is the fact that the lady in the radiator kind of convinces the lead character of Henry to murder his own child.
At one point, while she is doing a song and dance, she is rained upon by these sort of squirming sperm-like objects that come out of nowhere and begins to proceed with her song and dance, crushing as many of these things in a messy way as possible.
The lady in the radiator is whatever you want her to be. She could be a representation of someone that you know, someone who changed, perhaps got old, perhaps got sick, and there is a fear there just looking at them, not understanding why they don't look the way that your memory constructs them. Or it could just be the monster that lives in the closet, pops out and eats you. It's whatever just kind of like sits in your stomach, which is the definition of a David Lynch movie.
When people say the monster, they mean Frankenstein's monster. I think personally it's been about 100 years. The fact is when you say Frankenstein, people know you mean Frankenstein's monster. And when you mean the doctor, you say Dr. Frankenstein.
The monster is what Mary Shelley called this creature, who was created by Dr. Victor Frankenstein, who is sort of a mad scientist who wanted to sort of play God. And in doing so, made an awful mistake.
He's this creation who is not quite human and just longs to be human, longs for love, longs for friendship. And quite often, the scary moments are created when the monster thinks he is closest to humanity and accidentally hurts someone.
One of my favorite scenes that appears in a lot of the adaptations of Frankenstein is a scene when he meets this little girl by a lake.
Would you like one of my flowers?
And this is the moment where we sort of see Frankenstein's monster as a monster, but it's not really his fault. He doesn't know better.
No, you're hurting me! No!
This is a monster that one really feels sorry for. He is a creature who never asked to be born, who has just enough self-awareness to be disgusted by himself in the mirror, and all of the acts of violence that he perpetrates eventually brings a mob of pitchfork-wielding villagers after him in order to kill him.
Mary Shelley's original book doesn't give a lot of description for how it looks. We know it has sutures, we know it's mostly human, but filmmakers take a lot of interesting liberties.
The Frankenweenie films, Tim Burton has made 2. Those always make me so sad because it brings on a whole other idea of what happens if a creature or a person that you love dies.
Who thought it was a good idea for Robert De Niro to play Frankenstein's monster? It's a great performance, but it's also just like, wow. I always forget that he plays Frankenstein's monster, and it's like, oh yeah, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. He's the monster. Don't miss watching Kenneth Branagh resurrect Robert De Niro in a vat of electric eels. For whatever flaws that movie has, it has imagination. It is definitely the most bonkers adaptation of Frankenstein you can ever encounter.
The most literally monstrous characters are those people who are taunting and trying to manipulate and trying to use the creature. For the creature himself is actually a gentle soul in an absolutely monstrous body.
So the original Nosferatu film was tremendously influential. It's hard to believe it's almost 100 years old, because when you watch it, this particular permutation of this ancient vampire with the bald head and the long claws and the ears and the practical effects at work in that film are all top-notch, and they stand up 100 years later.
Nosferatu was fairly clearly inspired by Bram Stoker's Dracula, but makes some changes along the way. The original Nosferatu is actually set before the book Dracula. It is set during plague times, and the vampire is seen as kind of the coming of the plague. So he has these rat-like features and is often surrounded by rats. He's a very unique look for a vampire, and actually a look that has persisted throughout cinema history.
When Werner Herzog remade Nosferatu in 1979 with Klaus Kinski, the appearance of the character was a direct homage to Max Schreck. When you have an actor as sort of, professionally demented as Kinski, you get a really vivid figure out of that.
He works a lot with his hands and kind of tipping his face down, and he seems to be nurturing a little wound that's always sort of like just around his neck area.
I could change everything. Will you come to me and be my ally? That be salvation for your husband.
In Shadow of the Vampire, which is a film from 2000, the filmmaker Elias Merhige imagines the making of Nosferatu with the conceit that the reason Max Schreck was so intimidating in character and so convincing as Orlok is because he was, in fact, a vampire. This is a kind of metafictional conceit that recasts the making of Nosferatu almost as a kind of documentary.
How dare you! How dare you destroy my photographer! You idiot!
Did I kill some of your people, Murnau? I can't remember.
It's a kind of silly idea, but it accounts to some extent for the uncanny fear people still feel when looking at Schreck in that role.
Max Schreck, the actor, doesn't even attempt to mimic human behavior. The silent film aspect of it really pulls that out. You have a monster walking around among people who are very, very invested in pretending he's not a monster. There is no attempt to hide the fact that this thing isn't a person, or if he is once a person, he isn't anymore.
Otachi from Pacific Rim is textbook kaiju. He's big, he's destructive, he's glowing, and Otachi has all of the Guillermo del Toro creature design trademarks.
His level of granular minutia detail. He knows in and out everything of monsters and the anatomy of monsters. No detail was not considered by Guillermo of that monster.
The best giant monsters are the ones that, like all monster designs, you can see its shadow and you know instantly what monster it is. Now, I don't know if Otachi actually fits those parameters, but what it does have is that evolving form that all good giant monsters contain.
The fact that all of these monsters, who only have one fight each, show up and have a character moment on some level. The contrast is that the monsters are more fun to watch than the Jaegers, because the Jaegers just punch back. The monsters show up looking for a fight, and that's where you get Otachi. That's where you get the character of the monster that's like, okay, let's go.
Yesterday, Godzilla was the atom bomb. Nuclear catastrophe symbolized by a giant monster. Today, the kaiju more or less represents climate change and the catastrophes of weather. It is the tsunami in Japan, it is Hurricane Katrina, it is the monster that represents the viciousness of living on this planet.
As a monster, Pale Man really earns his position at the head of a table. Guillermo del Toro's Pale Man, which is seen in Pan's Labyrinth, really put Doug Jones on the scene of monster films.
Creature performer Doug Jones was known as a contortionist and a mime, and he's played a lot of great creatures, especially for Guillermo del Toro. Del Toro knows that he's this expert of movement, and when it comes to the Pale Man, it's an expert of stillness. The Pale Man is mostly asleep, and only when he comes to life do we get so scared. And he moves like this creature who has aches and pains. He's kind of stretching, kind of getting ready, and ready to attack. It's a slow-moving creature, kind of a classic horror trope, slowly coming after Ophelia, and it's this wonderful, thrilling escape.
Pan's Labyrinth takes place in the 1940s under Francoist rule, when very few people could actually feed their families. The little girl in this film just has to steal the key away from Pale Man, but when she steals 2 grapes, it awakens his terror and he charges after her.
This is a guy who will freak you out because he puts his hands up like this and sees through his, he sees through his hands. He puts his eyeball into his hands, wears them like that. Just him looking at you, every little shiver of his movements is jolting. That's what makes him such a memorable character.
Guillermo del Toro made this really beautiful speech, and he says, I have been saved by monsters. Monsters are the thing in life that give us permission to have flaws. They tell us something about ourselves. And I think you can really see that depth and that love for Guillermo del Toro's monsters in Pan's Labyrinth.
Probably the biggest portrayal of Quetzalcoatl on film is in Larry Cohen's Q, the Winged Serpent. This is a very fun exploitation movie that I think borders on the edge of art. Even though it's about this giant flying monster attacking New York City, it makes so many unique and strange choices. It's a really wonderful film.
This is a film that is very much having fun with the monster. The monster doesn't necessarily look real. It is made through stop-motion animation at a time when most monsters in the 1980s looked far more sophisticated than this.
Q the Winged Serpent works so well because it's an old throwback in a modern day context. You have this big stop motion beastie that you usually associate with Ray Harryhausen matinees up in New York City, eating people off buildings and doing the kind of damage that you would never see in stuff that's stop motion.
Just regular people on the street being covered in blood as this flying monster rips people apart. You know, people on rooftops, whether they be construction workers or people in a pool just getting picked off by a flying monster. It's such a funny idea, but Larry Cohen makes it pretty shocking, pretty disgusting and terrifying.
I also like that it has babies, and seeing a baby version of any creature really shows that someone is starting to think about the way this creature breathes, where it comes from. And I think there's way more love in these little animals than anybody else really would have put into it.
Q the Winged Serpent is just such an eccentric film. Like, it's more of a collection of scenes than a conventional movie, but every scene is just brimming with inspired choices from both the actors and the performers, and at the heart of it, this amazing stop-motion monster from David Allen. One of the most, I think, iconic cult movie monsters of all time. I'm still disappointed that we haven't gotten Q2.
Jordan Peele made a really iconic villain with Red from Us. Red is a doppelganger of the main character, Adelaide, and we find out that there's like this society underground that basically has versions of everyone.
You have a Black family who's middle class and kind of upwardly mobile, trying to get to a certain place in this society, but contending with this shadow versions of themselves in this underground marginalized space.
One night, they see that there's another family who's standing at the edge of the driveway. And this family's all in red jumpsuits, and they're holding scissors. It's a really kind of chilling image. And, you know, the film kind of turns into a home invasion film at that point.
Now, I thought I already done told y'all to get off my property, okay? So if y'all want to get crazy, we can get crazy. Now, the cops are already on their way.
It looks like one is a wealthy family. It looks like the others have come out of prison. I mean, these red jumpsuits have come out of a prison or asylum. They look more marginalized. And it's not just a case of, like marginalized black people. You see marginalized white people in some of these tethered as well, right? So it's not just a movie about race, though it can be about race.
I think Lupita Nyong'o, who plays Adelaide and Red, does an exceptional job at playing both parts. She's very likable and very brave as Adelaide, and as Red, she's scary and creepy and fearless.
And to think, if it weren't for you, I never would have danced at all.
But I think what's really scary is this idea that there's another version of you that would do horrible things and could even like masquerade as you. I think that it's a really scary, scary concept.
Gremlins is the most punk that the monster movie has gotten, and certainly its lead villain, Stripe, is to me Sid Vicious covered in lizard skin.
What makes Stripe stand apart from the other gremlins is even as a Mogwai, he's mean. He bites people back then, and he also seems very intent on becoming a gremlin. Gizmo has no interest in being a gremlin. Stripe is always trying to make it happen.
I love the scene of all the gremlins singing Hi-Ho from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but if you look really closely, you'll see that Stripe is actually not singing. He's the only gremlin that's not joining in on the fun and not joining in on the joy.
One of the interesting changes about the original script of Gremlins is Gizmo was actually supposed to become Stripe. Gizmo was going to turn evil and become the main evil gremlin. It was only when executive producer Steven Spielberg stepped in and suggested that Gizmo and Stripe could exist side by side that they realized that there was an opportunity for Gizmo to become a hero and a main character who helped fight Stripe.
Gremlins 2, which is a better movie than the first Gremlins, one of the best satirical comedies I think ever made in the United States, takes this idea of the gremlins running amok and transfers it to a sort of Trump Tower situation. It's not Trump Tower, but it's the Clamp Tower. And not only are the gremlins sort of crazed and nasty, but they also become self-aware. And you can see that Dante is just having a ball with the logic of sequels.
In Gremlins 2, the new batch, Stripe is reimagined as Mohawk, kind of reborn as another Mohawked Mogwai. This time he's black, and this time he's even meaner.
Mohawk's preoccupied with murdering, once again, Gizmo. And we know it's really Stripe because despite the fact that Mohawk has never met Gizmo, he recognizes him firsthand.
And Stripe is so mean, in fact, he turns himself into a giant spider. But this time, of course, Gizmo has been pushed too far, and he takes revenge Rambo style.
John Carpenter's The Thing is actually a quasi-remake of a Howard Hawks film from 1951 called The Thing from Another World. But whereas The Thing from Another World had this alien, previously frozen monster that was very much a B-movie creation, kind of lurks about like a Frankenstein's monster, Carpenter's The Thing employs devastatingly frightening creatures.
The only thing that I want to see actually defeat Kurt Russell in a movie is The Thing. And that's because the character design is quite possibly the greatest in all of film history. These images are so disturbing but so unusual that they stick in your head and they don't go away.
The Thing is one of the closest Hollywood has ever gotten to capturing a kind of Lovecraft-style creature, something that is beyond description and beyond definition. And it was realized by this brilliant special effects artist who was in his 20s when he designed these permutations that make up collectively The Thing, Rob Bottin.
I'm astonished by how gross it is and how captivating the effects are and the blood is. And I sometimes kind of intentionally forget what happens next. So I always forget who's infected by the thing.
That's the real test of the film, is who can they trust? Every single character has to sort of battle that and try to figure out, has this person been taken over? Has this other person been taken over? It really turns into this existential threat of knowing that there is no one but yourself that you can rely on, and there's nowhere for you to run to.
For me, The Thing is at its most grotesque in the defibrillator sequence.
Clear!
Clear.
It is so upsetting. And one of the reasons why it's upsetting is because you really don't know if anyone in this film is possibly this monster.
After you see this film and you see, you know, medical shows or anyone on a gurney, anyone with a defibrillator, you immediately like, oh, is that person's head gonna turn into Spiderhead? I'll always think of Spiderhead. And like, I can't get Spiderhead out of my head. Please, somebody, get Spiderhead out of my head.
To me, Ursula felt like the first true camp Disney villain. There is just something so fun and joyous about watching Ursula do her thing. She really seems to just embrace her devilishness, and it's an absolute joy to watch.
Ursula is a Disney monster with attitude. She is certainly one of the most theatrical, and I think what makes her so appealing is that she was based on a real-life icon, and that is the drag artist Divine.
Who doesn't love a drag queen? And of course, Divine was one of the greatest of all drag queens. So why wouldn't you base one of the most iconic Disney villains on this fabulous, fabulous human being?
Divine had always said in his childhood that he wanted to grow up to be a Disney villain, and that actually did happen. Unfortunately, Divine died a few months before the premiere of this film, but you're really seeing Divine in Ursula's makeup, in Ursula's hair, and certainly in Ursula's attitude.
I always preferred Ursula to Ariel. I wanted her to get what she wanted. She always had the moves. She was smart, she was clever, and of course, she should have won that bet. Everyone knows she got cheated out of what was rightfully hers.
She is not afraid of her body. She feels very comfortable in her body, and that kind of villain was so empowering to come out in the 1980s.
This is a character who's drenched in a kind of self-pity and malevolence. She's incredibly manipulative, so she's just kind of pure class all the way. I don't know if there has been a better villain in a non-Disney Pixar movie in the 30+ years since Little Mermaid than her. She's fantastic.
I guess the question is Amelia Vanek really the monster in The Babadook? And the answer is yes. It's a movie about guilt and grief and trauma. It's all about what she does to double down on every bad decision and the way that everything gets worse around her.
The Babadook is a creature as we first meet him. He's part of a storybook, and he's this scary creature that has like a top hat, long fingers. He wears a sort of suit. But as we watch the movie, we find out that the Babadook is actually like a physical manifestation of Amelia's depression.
We get a good sense of how frustrating it is to be a single widowed mother trying to bring things together and move past the grief and pain of losing her husband and keeping things together for her son, and how challenging that is.
The horror aspect comes in when you see her having sleepless night after sleepless night, when you see her having a really rough day at work and her child is screaming at the top of his lungs, and you sense the growing desperation, but she's fiercely protective of him.
It's one of the rare monster movies where it's not about defeating the monster, it's about controlling the monster. It's about learning to live with that monster. I think it's one of the smarter takes on using depression and grief as a metaphor for a monster that's been made, because it really understands this is something that you gotta feed to manage. And that's why at the end of the movie, she's still living with the Babadook. Amelia hasn't defeated the Babadook. The Babadook will always be with her.
The Wolfman, werewolves, and wolf women have existed throughout cinema history, but the interesting thing about this monster is how much cinema has informed our folklore about werewolves. What is realized very early on is that the werewolf and the wolfman at the end is not really what you're after. What you're after is the transformation. Of course, this is most famous in An American Werewolf in London, where they really pushed the effects to the limit to create a crazy transformation.
That particular transformation scene is so detailed and goes on so long and just shows it happen in a way that's never been done before. Before this, you always saw a werewolf transformation happen from a character walking behind a tree and then reappearing. and he has more makeup on, but you never actually see it play out in real time. And I think that really shocked audiences and was a real game changer in a lot of ways.
When you think of transformations, of course, you have to think about puberty. And one of the greatest movies about any sort of horrific transition into puberty is Ginger Snaps. Not only do you have two sisters that are at different points in their lives as they grow into different things, they now become horrible werewolves that are fighting each other and battling in the best possible way.
I think Ginger Snaps is a perfect melding of metaphor and horror, where you have these wonderful monster effects, you have these wonderful characters who you can't help but root for even when they're opposed against each other.
That creature design is also incredibly enduring as you see Ginger in her final moments and her breasts are dangling and she's drooling and terrifying and ripping men apart, which, you know, we all want to do as teenage girls.
And it's scary to think about the fact that you couldn't control your body and that you would be beholden to the moon every month. That's pretty terrifying. So no wonder we continue to tell werewolf and wolfman stories, because I think that they relate to sort of our own like body horror and our fears of our body and our transforming bodies.
One of the best modern monster designs is H.R. Giger's Xenomorph. One of the things that works so well about the Xenomorph is H.R. Giger was not only an artist, he was also a fabricator. He came from a design background, and he actually built the original Xenomorph suit. And that suit is weird. It is full of animal bones, it is full of human bones. There is a human skull in it. It is a very creepy and cursed suit, and I think that's why it works so well.
The Alien franchise, to me, is at its basis a gestational horror film. The monster here is the idea of gestation, the idea of childbirth, the idea of being born. And I really love the first Alien film from 1979 because it really sets it out in stages.
It starts as an egg, then there's the facehugger, and the facehugger alone is a scary monster. But then no, the idea is that it like rapes you, sticks a seed in your stomach, and then a chest burster comes out. Then now you're like, okay, that's the monster. No, that's not the monster. It's gonna grow up and be this black, demonic, faceless thing. I think that's one of the great details about the Xenomorph is it doesn't have eyes. It just has this dome.
James Cameron knew when he made the Alien sequel, he had to do something bigger and better. James Cameron had always wanted to create a creature that essentially was built on a crane, something giant, and that's how he conceived the Alien Queen. He and Stan Winston worked together to create this just never-before-seen huge puppet. And from then on, you knew that if you made an Alien movie, you had to push the envelope.
I think the Xenomorph is a monster that you cannot take on. I think what makes it a memorable monster is how vicious and how effective it is as a killer. As Ian Holmes says, it's the perfect killer.
You admire it.
I admire its purity.
It's a terrifying monster, and at the same time, it's the coolest looking monster. And I think that's why it's persevered and lived through so many films.
I'll say it right now on camera, my favorite movie monster of all time is called a Yayucha. I think maybe some people don't know that Yayuchas are actually the official name for the predator species. The predator from, of course, 1987's film Predator.
This is a creature that starts off invisible, becomes visible, and remains scary. And then when it removes that mask, man, oh man, it is like nothing you've ever seen before.
It's definitely a light moment in the film, and it's a moment that is repeated in several other films of the franchise.
You're one ugly mother.
It is like the understatement of all monster films.
When they first started shooting that movie, they didn't even know what this alien was gonna look like. So they just kind of had a guy in a suit that kind of looked like a big red ant. And they didn't have just any guy, by the way. They had Jean-Claude Van Damme. Yeah, Jean-Claude Van Damme was the Predator for a few days of shooting on this film. And then finally, Stan Winston cracked the design.
Stan Winston saw a poster of a Rastafarian warrior in producer Joel Silver's office and used that for the basis. He decided to give him quills instead of hair. Beyond that, he was on a plane with James Cameron drawing sketches of the face, and James Cameron said, you know what, I always wanted to use something with mandibles, and that helped inspire him to create the very unique mouth.
This is a monster sort of created out of the impulse of what would it take to take down Arnold Schwarzenegger. You know, in the mid-'80s, you have Arnold as Conan, you have Arnold as the Terminator, you have Arnold sort of as the epitome of hard-bodied movie stardom. You want to put him one-on-one with a 9-foot-tall weapon master, alien bounty hunter with like weird warthog facial features.
The Ayucha hunts for sport. It's all about game, and it won't kill something that is disabled or injured. Or for instance, in the second film, it won't harm someone when it realizes that they're a pregnant woman. It's really about the thrill of the kill. And the Ayucha are incredibly intelligent monsters, and I think that's also why they're really scary.
Zuul is one of the funniest monsters in Ghostbusters. Zuul is the gatekeeper of Gozer the Gozerian and is somebody that is taunting and haunting Dana Barrett, played by Sigourney Weaver, throughout the film.
No one really wants the refrigerator to be possessed, and you really don't want to be possessed by a dog from hell. I think the scene with Dana opening her fridge for the first time and realizing that her apartment building is essentially possessed really scared me as a kid, because we all have refrigerators, and I guess that means it can happen to anyone.
That was 2 days ago, and I haven't been back to my apartment.
Generally, you don't see that kind of behavior in a major appliance.
What makes Zuul a very fun entity is it allows Sigourney Weaver to essentially play two different characters. She plays Dana Barrett, this straight woman against Bill Murray. She's very, buttoned up, and she goes on to become this va-va-voom girl who has a fan in her face, who is lusty and wild when she's possessed by Zuul. So she gets to have a lot of comedic fun, which didn't happen often for women in the 1980s.
Weaver's so gorgeous and statuesque and so game as a physical comedian. She plays the possession really well. The idea that like she's inhabited by this weird claymation dog, like she totally sells you on this idea.
The other great thing about Zuul, of course, is Sigourney Weaver eventually becomes this weird, creepy dog creature. These dog creatures create chaos all around her apartment building, and they're a wonderful effect, a combination of creature effects, stop motion, and just about everything thrown at the wall. It's a really great way to have a character be like 9 different things and a total delight.
So I think what's really important about the use of the monster in horror films is the monster has to be sympathetic. The monster has to be other, but also us. It has to occupy that liminal space between us and them. And a monster can pretty much be anything that's up to the imagination, which is why like a monster movie just means, as opposed to nature or a vampire movie or a werewolf movie, it's all the shades in between.